I'm Dr. Will Cole, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Hahn,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Dr. Will Cole.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. I'm your host, Hank Garner. You can find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com. When you're there, click on the links in the right-hand sidebar to subscribe to the show. I'd like to thank some sponsors for making today's show possible. First off is George Weir with his book Gem of Sky, Book 1 of the Factions of Sky series. Jim is an orphan living in the floating city of Cirrus. As the dreaded Horn attack, Jim and his friends are scooped up in an adventure of a lifetime when the floating orphanage Janus is destroyed. Not only must Jim, Crowan, and a mech named Goat survive aboard a Horn capital ship, but they must find a way to save each other and all of Sky. In order to do so, Jim and his friends soon find themselves in the crosshairs of the two greatest fleets ever assembled, with a battle coming that may bring nightfall upon Earth forever. But there's a hope and a well-kept secret buried beneath a mountain far below in the land left devastated by the 200-year-old Holocaust. Gem of Sky, Book 1 of the Factions of Sky by George Weir. There's a link to it in the show notes. And thanks to Patricia Gilliam for sponsoring the show. Her book, Out of the Gray, which is the first book in the Honaria series. You really want to pick this up. Aliens, Politics, and Murder. Only the first one is new. This is such a fantastic series, and you can get in on the beginning of the series right now with Book 1, Out of the Gray. The Honaria series is one of my favorite series from one of my favorite writers. You're really going to love what Patricia's doing. Thank you to Patricia for sponsoring the show. Also, at the end of the show, we're going to have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to welcome Dr. Will Cole to the show. Will has a brand new book out called Ketotarian, the mostly plant-based plan to burn fat, boost your energy, crush your cravings, and calm inflammation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Excellent. Will, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Wow. So I grew up loving writing and reading. And you know what it probably was? It was my fifth grade English teacher. I went to a little small private Christian school. And the class was small, and so we got a lot of one-on-one attention with our teachers. And Mrs. Ziadi was her name. She was from Syria, and she really cultivated a love for the English language for me, and so much. And even to this day, we're Facebook friends, and I got to, she got to see my book, Ketotarian, come out, and she's probably in her 80s now. But it was really her that cultivated my love of writing and reading. And then from there, throughout school, I gravitated towards journalism and writing classes and public speaking classes. And I had a great teacher in high school in journalism too that really cultivated it as well, Mrs. Valerio. So it was two teachers really that did that for me, and being able to cultivate that craft and strengthen that craft.
Well, I hear that story so often, Will, that there is, and so many times it's a teacher. It's someone who recognizes that a kid has just that storytelling gene, that gift to communicate with people and to share information in a useful way, or to entertain people. It kind of manifests itself a lot of different ways in people, but so many times there's an adult, a parent or a teacher that gives just a little piece of motivation or encouragement. And so many people that I talk to that maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, still remember that person that encouraged them and how important that was for them, that when it got hard, they could remember back to that time. And it's those little things that get us through the toughest times, sometimes it seems like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really like looking back now as a parent, like just seeing the impact that teachers can have on kids, and maybe we all can have on people that are younger than us in a positive way and an encouraging way. Because that teacher, those two teachers were just normal adults, but they made such a major impact on my life. So I think we all can have that to some degree, especially teachers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't know that you studied journalism. What was it about that intrigued you?
I don't know what it was. I think it was just I just loved writing is really, I think, what it was. I loved writing. I loved the art of words and the use of words in specific ways. And I think that's what it just came. It came naturally to me, and I really loved it. And it was like my escape from like regular school. Right. Like I didn't see that as school. It was something I had to learn. I had to grow in it. It was work, but it wasn't arduous like the regular school. Like I wasn't great with math. I wasn't great with the other subjects. It really didn't come naturally to me. Writing and reading came naturally to me.
Wow. What sorts of stuff did you like to read?
I read some amazing fiction work. I mean, throughout my childhood and high school years, I liked fiction, but to be honest with you, more than anything, I liked nonfiction. I liked biographies. I liked autobiographies. I liked looking at things that were real, and kind of immersing myself in the experience of what it would be like to live at that time. So I liked learning about the Roosevelts and Kennedy and like American presidents and just their inner workings of their life, the politics, the geopolitical sort of time, like the foreign policy aspects of things at that time. So I still am fascinated by that today. But I was the weird kid that like really was into like American politics and American history in middle school and high school. I was pretty much alone in liking that at school, but I liked what I liked, and I always kind of just did my own thing in that way. And even today, I like try to bring up the conversation with my friends about these random topics about history, and they're just not interested. But I'm fascinated with history. I could talk about it all day long. That's not health. I mean, obviously, health is another component, but my like hobby was learning about history, actually.
I love biographies. I love memoirs, biographies, autobiographies, especially of people that I am not necessarily like, or people that had a completely different experience than me. There's just something about getting a glimpse inside of people and their lives, and just seeing what makes people turn out the way they are. That's one of the things that fascinates me the most. Especially about doing this podcast, is you get to, we all come from somewhere, and the life experiences and the things that turn us into who we are, just absolutely fascinates me. So I'm a history nerd as well. I love it.
Oh, good. We have that kinship.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Where did you grow up, Will?
I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, in the country, in suburbs outside of Pittsburgh. But basically, I lived in the country outside of the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so I grew up around cow fields and the forest, and that was my most, actually all my childhood, with a few small exceptions of while homes were in transition. I lived in the country. But I was actually born in Iowa, of all places, in the Midwest. But I was a very young baby when I moved to Pittsburgh. My parents are from Pittsburgh, so I was raised in Pennsylvania. And then, so that was my home, and it's still my home now. I moved to California for a number of years, but came back because really to raise my family, and it's a great area to be from.
Do you think growing up in the country, the suburbs, and then farther out, and being not having that urban experience, do you think that has shaped or impacted your thoughts on health and the things that you're passionate about now?
Probably. I think that probably informed me to some degree as it relates to health. I think more than my location, it was my parents' perspective on health that informed me from a young age. And that's not to say, I mean, there are many people in the wellness world that they didn't have health growing up. They didn't have parents that kind of respected health in that way or were into wellness, but they found it for themselves. For me, I had it as a child. My parents were into wellness when it wasn't cool in rural Pennsylvania in the 80s and 90s. I was drinking the weird tonics and elixirs, and it's like the cool place was to go to the health food store and like get the healthy treat like that nobody else would love, but I thought it was good. It was like the healthy version of whatever, junk food that they were eating. My friends were eating, but it was normal for me. And then when I got a little bit older, it was not cool, but I knew it was like the status at home. But I would like go and kind of do my own thing with my friends. But then I owned it for myself as a teenager and said like, no, I don't want to eat this way. I'm going to eat better. And it obviously has evolved over the years, which I wrote about in Ketotarian. But I was always cognizant of it because of my upbringing earlier on. Now, there are many people in the country, in rural Pennsylvania, even today, that really it's backwards in many ways when it comes to health, and they don't really know anything about it. But I do think there is something to be said for living off the land and growing your garden, which we did, where there's that aspect to it, where it's sort of a dichotomy. It's yes, we grow our garden in the summer. Yes, we have our vegetables that we have in the summer, but the culture still in Pennsylvania is we still go to the grocery store and buy the Frosted Flakes too. So it's a bit of both, but I'm sure a certain aspect of it was informed by my town.
What's really weird, Will, is that I also grew up in the country, and we always had a garden, and we had chickens, and everything. And you just inherently know that those things that you grow and that you have a hand in are just naturally healthier. Like everybody knows Frosted Flakes are not good for you, and everyone knows that if you go pick your own tomatoes and cucumbers, that these things are just better for you. It's like we're deeply programmed to understand, even if we ignore it, which things are better for us and which ones are not.
Oh, for sure. I think it's just innate in us. And the more we get back into that innateness and what we primarily instinctively know, I think it's in alignment with our biochemistry and what our genetics are adapted to. It's a great thing for our health, and it's getting away from all the noise that we see on the television and in social media now, and really just getting back to the basics, I think would do this world a lot of good. And obviously we've made some amazing advancements. We're talking across the country on a podcast, and this is a great stuff. But I think that sometimes the noise can be confusing for people as to what the heck is even their center. And I think finding their center and finding a place of peace and stillness will inform them to healthy things, because people, like you said, ultimately instinctively know what is healthy for the most part.
So you talked about, as a teenager, owning that lifestyle for yourself. Was that when you started thinking about pursuing health and wellness as your career, your life's mission?
Yeah, it was. So I knew that I wanted to get into healthcare at that time as a teenager. So I, at that point, became a vegetarian, but mostly a vegan in my life. And I wanted to make sort of informed health decisions. I learned about factory farming and what they did with, like cows and how animals were treated and just the quality of the food and all that stuff. Now, I wasn't raised a vegan. I was raised really local farm, like grass-fed stuff. Like it was just like full-fat raw dairy. It was very much like almost
like paleo. It
was very paleo, very Weston A. Price before it was even a thing. That's what I was raised on, and then I became more plant-centric vegan at that time, just from the food standpoint. I wasn't ethically opposed to people getting good quality meat. from local farms. For myself, I didn't feel like it was something that I wanted to do. And I did that for about 10 years while I was in school. So I went to an integrative school in Los Angeles called Southern California University of Health Sciences. It's sort of a integrative school where there's MDs and DCs and LACs and naturopaths and nurse practitioners all sort of there learning their different modalities. And I had heard of a guy called Datis Karazian who had gone to my school. He was older than I was and was talking about this thing called functional medicine. And that's how I heard about functional medicine first. And even today, Datis Karazian is one of the leading voices in functional medicine. He teaches for the Institute for Functional Medicine, IFM. And he was really the voice that I heard speaking about this. And that informed me even more. And again, for all of us, we have this wellness journey of learning about food and learning what works for our bodies and what doesn't. And at that point, it was right around that time that I was saying, look, was the way that I eating, was it optimal for me? So then my diet had an evolution again to being more Ketotarian, which is why I wrote the book, where it's this mostly plant-based ketogenic approach that evolved first for myself, but then now obviously seeing thousands of patients over the years all over the world. We primarily have a virtual clinic where we do webcam consultations, and I get to see all different walks of life, all different areas of the world, and how foods and natural medicines and lifestyle changes can impact one's labs positively and impacts one's wellness positively.
Wow. That is, it's crazy to think that we've advanced to the point where we can treat people and share information literally around the world, and it's just like a day at the office for you. That's pretty crazy. I
know. It's like I just stand at my standing desk, or if I get lazy, I'll sit down, and I'm isolated in my little office. My team is all here outside of the office, but it's just I get to literally go around the world, not literally, but my experiences with people are going around the world of just in their living room or in their office or in their car, talking about their health and going over things with them. So it's really a cool time that we live in. And that's, again, that dichotomy of technology and modernity. It brings a lot of good things, but it's still having healthy balances with these things so we can still find that center to make healthy choices that instinctively most of us know.
Right. We've talked about a couple things, Will, and I don't like to use the term buzzwords because I think there's a negative connotation there. But a couple of things we've talked about are kind of buzzworthy right now. A lot of people are talking about these things, and some people may not understand. So what is functional medicine?
So functional medicine, another word for that is integrative medicine or systems medicine. So the main differences between functional medicine and mainstream medicine. Number one, we interpret labs that are done currently, like people that have labs from their PCP or endocrinologist or any other specialist. Every lab has a reference range, or almost every lab has a reference range, and they'll have the patient's number, and then they'll have this X to Y interval of numbers where they're measuring their lab against. Well, we get that reference range in most cases from a statistical bell curve average of people who go to labs. And people that go to labs are typically people with health problems. So there's a lot of people that go to their doctor and say, like, I don't feel good, I'm fatigued, or I can't lose weight, or I have these symptoms that I'm experiencing, and the labs largely or entirely come back quote unquote normal, even though the patient knows, like, heck, I don't feel normal. But they're told you're just depressed, here's an antidepressant, you just need to lose weight, or you're just getting older. And so many people settle for feeling lousy because they're being compared to this reference range. What they're unintentionally being told is they're a lot like the other people with health problems that make up this reference range. These reference ranges in most cases are not standardized. You'll see them vary from lab to lab based on whoever goes to those lab locations. So in functional medicine, we standardize the optimal range. So we're basically, if you take people with health problems out of that reference range that you see on the lab, what's left is people that live long, healthy, thriving, vibrant lives. Their body is functioning the best. That's the functional range where we get our name, functional medicine. So that's the first thing we do differently. We're comparing everyone's labs to optimal thriving wellness, and that's the functional range and not the labs reference range, which isn't very helpful. And the second thing we do differently is we run more comprehensive labs. We're looking at things like microbiome issues or hormonal imbalances or inflammatory issues or food sensitivities or things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO or intestinal permeability or leaky gut syndrome or histamine intolerance, all these underlying root components that give rise to why people feel the way that they do. So we run the most relevant labs based on a comprehensive health history. So we don't want to run every lab under the sun. It'd be lovely to get as much data as we can, but we want to be comprehensive without being excessive. So we run the most targeted, relevant labs to get the root cause issues of why people are going through what they're going through. And we realize we're all created differently. So there's not a cookie cutter approach to getting somebody healthy, and what works for one person can flare the next person up. So we try not to have a bias as, this is the way that everybody should eat and breathe and live and function, because we're all different, and we want to tailor and customize healthcare to the individual. So we look at health history very comprehensively. We ask a lot of questions. We're like clinical Sherlock Holmes in that way. And then we run the labs and we look at real life, and we're really just fine-tuned to the person. So that's what it is. It's personalized natural healthcare, but it's evidence-based, based on labs. So that's what it is. That's what functional medicine is.
So it's the best of scientific treatment, getting data and responding to the data, if you will, but also eschewing the things that sometimes make the situation worse when we treat one thing and then wind up treating a side effect of that thing, and then you just kind of falls out from there.
Exactly. Yeah, we ask the question. This is a good criterion for anybody going through any health issues or anybody wanting to optimize their health, is what is the most effective option that causes you the least amount of side effects. And for some people, medications fit that criteria. There are some people that are alive because of medications. It just so happens that most people, for most people, these medications don't fit that criteria. They have lots of potential side effects. They aren't the most effective option. They're just the only option that are given because that's what are given in the standard model of care. The training in the standard model of care, conventional medicine, is to diagnose a disease, give it an ICD-10 code, and match it with the medication. It's this sort of medicinal matching game. And anybody that's listening to this show right now will tell you they know that to be true. That's really the only options they are given when they are dealing with a chronic health problem, or obviously if surgery is indicated. But for the most part, we're talking about disease-managing drugs when it comes to managing chronic health problems. And this is what's plaguing the human race. This is ubiquitous, sadly. But the only options that are given are different brand names of different medications. And this works sometimes. There's a place for it. But ultimately speaking, there's a lot of people falling through the cracks of this sort of oversimplistic, generalized, cookie-cutter approach to health, which ultimately isn't even healthcare. It's just disease management. It's sick care, right, to say the least.
One of the other words that we have used in our conversation today is ketogenic, or the ketogenic diet. And I am assuming that your story of learning care and dealing with patients this is one of the modalities that you came across. And even though you have a history with veganism and vegetarianism, a ketogenic diet is not something we normally associate with that way of eating. Explain to us what a ketogenic diet is, and you talk about this in your book and on your blog as well. But your journey from a vegan that was not exactly well to finding the perfect combination that works for you, and then sharing with us in the book Ketotarian how maybe we can fashion this to what's best for us.
Sure. So ketogenic, that word is making ketones. And ketones is this form of fuel that our bodies naturally produce out of our liver, and it's providing clean fuel for our bodies. So instead of being a sugar burner, which most people are, They can be a fat burner, and that's what ketosis, nutritional ketosis is. And that's what ketogenic, or when you hear people going keto, that's what they're getting. They're putting their body in this metabolic state called nutritional ketosis. And this is this fat burning, anti-inflammatory. There's tons of great clinical research, obviously, that I talk about in Ketotarian, that we love in the functional medicine space, that people love, obviously, in the keto space, learning about this and seeing the benefits in people's lives. So as a functional medicine practitioner, I am not a ketogenic doctor, but I am a doctor that uses the ketogenic diet in ways when it's clinically appropriate and we personalize it to the individual. So Ketotarian was really born out of my own journey, and now seeing patients over the years and seeing their journey, thousands of people, what works, what doesn't, and kind of boiling it down to the big truths in the book. And it's an amalgamation of the best of both worlds. It's a plant-centric ketogenic book. And you're right, it's two seemingly polar opposite camps. You have the keto world, where you look on social media and it's pictures of bacon and butter and cheese, and then you have the plant-based world, where you think of the animal rights activists and the environmentalists. And I think that really they have way more in common than they realize. And this book, Ketotarian, that I wrote is for both worlds. And it's A, to show them there's a lot more in common than they realize between the two of them. And B, for the plant-based world, you can get all the amazing benefits of being in ketosis, losing weight, gaining energy, lowering inflammation, but still stay true to your beliefs or your preferences. But some people just don't like eating lots of meat, and they maybe don't do well with lots of dairy. So they can still get in on the keto action and still be plant-centric. Ketotarian is vegan, vegetarian, and pescatarian, so there's different options for people. And then it's for the keto world, which a lot of people they see the initial benefits of being in ketosis. They lose weight, they can see all the amazing health benefits, but then they get stuck at a plateau. And it's for them of realizing, okay, look, long-term wellness, how do we make this keto thing long-term sustainable for you? And I think that's where Ketotarian comes in for the keto world. Or maybe they're doing great, they're not at a plateau, they just want more variety into their life. Maybe they want more plant-based keto ideas. So it's for the successful keto eater too, that just wants more variety in their food. So I wanted to bring something fresh to the conversation. There's a lot of great ketogenic cookbooks out there and health books out there. I wanted to bring something that hasn't really been done, and I think that's what we did with Ketotarian.
Absolutely. And we failed to mention earlier that you also co-host a wildly popular weekly podcast with our friend Jimmy Moore called Keto Talk. And since you have been co-hosting with Jimmy for like a year and a half or so now?
Yeah, about a year and a half.
Yeah, about a year and a half, that you always bring this great insight into this thing that, like we mentioned earlier about social media, this thing that gets distilled down to the least common denominator, and a lot of times the worst least common denominator of what this way of eating is. And you always bring really great perspective to it. So when you announced Ketotarian, I was not surprised at all, but I was really intrigued to see how you would turn this and make it so accessible for everyday people, and you've really condensed it down to a way that is super accessible and shareable. If you don't mind, what do you think, these two camps that seem to be diametrically opposed, that you are bringing together and showing their commonalities in Ketotarian, from the vegan side, what do you think those people are missing, that they can gain, by moving the needle a little bit the other way? And what do you think that, the folks that reduce a keto diet down to basically just a carnivorous diet, what do you think they can gain by moving their needle a little bit the other way?
Great question. So I think both camps, you talk about, let's just say an extreme example like the carnivore diet or the conventional keto diet on one side, and then like the classic high carb, even if it's real food, but sprouted grains and whole grains and legumes and the classic real food crunchy looking vegan vegetarian, and which I was, that the both camps, they're better than the standard American diet. But just because something's better doesn't mean it's optimal. And just because something's better doesn't mean it's optimal for long-term sustainable wellness, meaning that most people eating the standard Western diet will see positive benefits eating these ways in the short term, no doubt about it. But long-term wellness, what's right for you on an individual basis, is the question that we're talking about here. So at that point, I think where the plant-based world goes wrong for a lot of people is that they're depending a lot of carbs for energy. They may be better than like the sugary cereal, but maybe they're even having those too in the name of being vegan and vegetarian. I mean, I obviously there's the junk food vegan and vegetarian. I'm not going to even comment on those. I'm talking about the people that are actually going real food, but they're depending on the sprouted grains and the legumes and the fruits and all of that stuff for every meal for fuel. That will work for some people better than others. For me, it worked for definitely a long time, but depending on that as the predominance of the foods, the foundation of the foods I was eating, it's a higher lectin food, meaning those are proteins that are plant defense mechanisms, and it can create some inflammation for people, especially people with gut problems or like autoimmune predispositions. Like I have autoimmune conditions on both sides of my family. I have the MTHFR gene mutation, which just means my body's not that good at activating folate and detoxing and these type of genetic SNPs that can happen for a lot of people. So with that, depending on those sort of carby foods for a decade will start to impact your microbiome and your inflammation levels and your energy levels, like lower B12, lower other B vitamins, and lower iron levels. These are things that are problematic for many people. Again, better than the standard American diet, but is it optimal for many people? Well, seeing patients over the past decade, I'll tell you that a lot of them are doing all the right vegan, vegetarian things under the sun right, but they're still feeling lousy. So how can we optimize that? And then the other side, same thing. You'll see this honeymoon period of the carnivore diet or the classic keto diet, and anything that's high fat, low carb, it's A-okay as long as it fits your correct macronutrient ratio. It works for a lot of people short term, but long term, they're having digestive problems. They're having other inflammatory problems. They are having maybe other like autoimmune response problems because they're depending maybe on more dairy than their body is liking. And then the long-term impact on the microbiome, the lack of fiber there from a microbiome diversity standpoint. The bacteria in our gut eat what we eat, and the more diverse our microbiome is, the more abundant our health is. And when you're not eating vegetables because you're afraid of their carb content, or you're on a carnivore diet, long-term microbiome diversity is going to be impacted, probably. I talked about on Keto Talk, obviously, there's exceptions to that rule. Like there's the tribe in Tanzania called the Hodza Tribe, and they actually had more microbiome diversity, more gut bacteria diversity during the months where they ate less vegetables, but they were eating more meat. But the difference is they were having like raw meat and like drinking blood and doing all these primal Hadza things. And I mean, like I said on the show, like unless the carnivore dieters are going to go full Hadza, they're not going to get the microbiome diversity. They mostly are not doing. They're eating their bacon and their standard Western meats, even if they're organic, just because it's carnivore. I think the carnivore diet can be great in the short term. It's the ultimate elimination diet. You basically are eating one class of food. But long-term wellness is what I'm concerned and talking about in the functional medicine space and what we all are talking about in that space. So at that point, I think Ketotarian is, again, this alchemy between the both worlds. You can have both. You don't have to pick one or the other.
Well, and the carnivore diet, if you're eating fresh caught fish and wild game, that's very different than a pack of hot dogs from Walmart.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Will, you have a fantastic blog at drwillcole.com, and you're all the time writing these great posts and essays and highlighting something that I have never thought about and things that I might could try to integrate into what I try to do. And you have a very conversational style, and a lot of times you write from the point of how this thing has affected you, or maybe one of your patients or someone that you know, but you really bring it from a personal level. And I really like that about your writing style. And you brought that to Ketotarian, and you definitely do not approach sharing this information in a top-down way. You really kind of come alongside and say, this is Will, your friend. I'm going to tell you what worked for me, and let's see how this might work for you as well. Is that something that you consciously do? And in writing the book, what was your main concern about communicating with a vastly larger audience than maybe you get to communicate with in your office visits?
Yeah. It was definitely intentional. And I have like a certain voice that I write with and I feel resonate with. And I feel like, and as obviously as a writer, and this is what the show is about, but it's this sort of creative channel of like knowing, like I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll know exactly how I want to word this one thing about this one topic. And I will like go and type in my iPhone, my notes of how I would like to word that, or this play on words that I think would really resonate with people of getting a point across, or beginnings to articles. I'll have random thoughts of how I want to get that across. So it is definitely like the communication style is like I enjoy it tremendously, and until an article fits a certain balance, like I'm like unhappy with it, and I'll go back and try to restructure it until I get to the point where it's easy to understand. It's succinct. It's informational but succinct. So it is definitely something that I like putting time into and attention to, and I do. Part of my job is communicating to everyday normal people. And I think that's helped me be a better writer, because when you're explaining dense, like complicated health topics on labs, you learn very quickly that what's like normal for you to talk about is not so normal for other people. So even in this conversation right now, people may be overwhelmed with some of the words that I was talking about, like these health jargon stuff. But ultimately speaking, I think that the point is there. Even if they don't understand these weird words, the point is there. And that's what I try to do with the articles, is that even though we're going to use weird words, the fundamental essence of the message that I'm trying to get across hopefully is always there. And the cool thing about articles and the cool things about podcasts is you can go back and reread them or re-listen to them. So yeah, that's definitely a part of my intention.
When they're easy to share with other people as well, which is great. Will, the new book is out. It's been out for, I guess a couple of weeks now. And were you surprised at the reception that the book got? I mean, it went to like number 15 on all of, the U.S. Amazon, and it's still, in the top 100 or right at it, 2 weeks later. This message is obviously resonating with other people. Were you surprised?
I was really surprised. Again, like I said, I'm just seeing patients during the week. I'm not really spending too much time looking at all this stuff. And it was my first book, and I was really surprised. Out of all health books on like how Penguin Random House, my publisher, kind of graded it, I think it's some metrics that they use. It was number 2 of all health books for that week, this week of release. Yeah, and you're right. It hit number 15 on Amazon of all books, and there's 8 million some books on Amazon. Right. That's like crazy. And we hit like top 10 in Australia and Canada. So it's unreal. But I think, again, it goes back to what's the conversation piece that I think, just like with my articles or me talking to patients, just having my ear to the ground of saying, okay, what is the thing that's missing from the conversation? And I really felt like we tapped into something at the right place and right time. And I pushed the publisher to release it earlier rather than later, because I think the conversation needed to happen now in the time that we're at right now, in this ketogenic conversation and the plant-based conversations that's going on. I think it was just a lot of a good timing on everyone's part too, to bring this book out that I think is really refreshing for a lot of people.
Well, Will, just to bring it home, our audience is filled with a lot of people that are writers. A lot of people listen to the show while they're sitting at their desks at work every day, or maybe in their commute as they're going to their job. And most people, I think, kind of fall into these patterns. And it seems like when we start thinking about our health, we have to think differently than we normally do. What are some things some first steps that someone who maybe is not focused on their health and is maybe just we talk about the standard American diet and the things that are popular and things that are just easy to fall into. If someone wants to really start focusing on their health, what are some first steps that you would recommend for someone?
Yeah. So actually, in bringing it to the book, one of the things that I wanted to have for people is many keeping it simple options in Ketotarian. So for every deeper sciencey stuff, like tracking macros and calculations, all this stuff, I wanted a lot of keeping it simple options for people that are just getting into this or heard about this or listening to a writer podcast where they're not necessarily even into health. I think Ketotarian is going to be a good gateway and leaning them into something that's amazing for their wellness. So specifics, I put a list of what I call Ketotarianisms. These are just the basic tenets of somebody that wants to go plant-based keto or just bring more healthy real foods into their diet. And it would be keeping your healthy fats higher and keeping your carbs lower. And when you eat a non-starchy vegetable, so like spinach or any really vegetable out there, any vegetable basically, add a healthy fat. So that can be avocados or olives or olive oil or nuts and seeds or wild caught fish if you're going to do that, or pasture-raised eggs or ghee with clarified butter. So whenever you have a non-starchy vegetable, bring a healthy fat in. And then conversely, when you have a healthy fat, like one that I mentioned, bring a non-starchy vegetable in. And then after that, eat when you're hungry, pretty basic. But whenever you're hungry, be mindful of that and eat then. And then after that, eat until you are satiated. So not when you're full or sick or nauseous from overeating, but just when you're satiated. And I think if people follow those 5 or 6 rules, I think they'd be a lot better. And from there, they can lean into more stuff and learn more. But I think that's a good starting place. And if they did that, they'd feel a lot better.
Well, the book is called Ketotarian, the mostly plant-based plan to burn fat, boost your energy, crush your cravings, and calm inflammation. Dr. Will Cole, if people are just learning about you and your work, where can they find you online to dig into more about what you do?
Everything is at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com. And you can get Ketotarian there. The links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the independent bookstores are there. And then we are, again, primarily a virtual clinic. So we also offer a free webcam or phone health evaluation for people who want to get a functional medicine perspective on their case as well.
And people can also tune in on Thursdays to Keto Talk, where you guys dig really deep on things and answer a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's a great Keto Talk. I love getting to do that every week.
Absolutely. Dr. Will Cole, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Welcome to historic Sleepy Hollow, settled in 1640. Jason had looped around the town and had come up Broadway from the south. Behind the retaining wall next to the sign, a yard worker turned on his leaf blower, sending a tidal wave of yellow and red up and over the stones to splash off the windshield of the RV. They passed antique shops, a Shell station, and a Food King grocery. "This is the same Broadway, you know," said Eliza. "It goes all the way down to Times Square. Used to be an Indian trail, Manhattan to Fort Orange, for the fur trapping business." She kissed the dog. "Oh, don't worry, baby. Nobody's going to skin you. And you know what the town's most famous for?" "Well, duh," Jason said. Every kid named Crane, especially one as tall and skinny as Jason, had heard a lifetime of Ichabod jokes. He hoped never to hear another. "Did you know it was a real place?" "Of course," he said, though he hadn't. "Don't be so smart," said Eliza. "Turn here." The streets sloped towards the Hudson, the hillside trying to shake the village off its back. Jason slipped in behind a UPS truck and drove upwards. They turned onto Gory Brook Road. He stuck his head out the window, trying to pass. The UPS truck turned aside to the right. And he saw the house. "Here, said Eliza. She pointed at the driveway of 417 Gory Brook. Jason brought the RV to a smoke-belching halt. The house stood on a knoll, above a steep yard that angled downwards toward the Hudson. An ancient sycamore on the front lawn leaned precariously. The roof was an irregular A-frame, with a long slope on the left and a short one on the right, like a rotated checkmark. The upper floors were trimmed with bands of chocolate-brown wood in a rectangular pattern. They made the house look as if it were trapped behind the bars of a jail cell. A tiny triangular portico extended over the front door, which was rough-hewn, rounded on top, held together by two vertical metal bands, and dotted with nail heads. A Gothic novel in Braille. The gray-blue curtains at the ground-floor bay window gave the place a veiled-eye aspect, like his grandmother's cataracts. The house seemed to be inspecting Jason with that eye. "What are you doing here, boy?" "I'm watching you." Eliza put a hand on his shoulder. He jumped. "This is it," she said. She slapped the dashboard. "This is what?" "Our new home." "But—" Jason turned to her, baffled. Her face sparkled with delight. "Surprise!"